Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. So here's some interesting stats. Only 32% of games made $500. Basically, one developer has collected a bunch of data on AA and indie games that made at least $500 on Steam in 2024. And in total, on Steam, there were 18,000 games released. That's a huge amount. But when applying this filter of over $500 in terms of revenue, if so, then that number drops down significantly to just over 5,000 games. So yep, this is one of those stats that sounds really bad, but in reality, it's actually a good thing. Meaning, if you're treating game dev as a profession, if so, then you're not competing with those 18,000 games, your competition is actually much smaller. Then filtering it even further into hobbyist, indie, and AA, which yeah, 50 million for indie, that is definitely stretching the definition of the word indie, but still you have to put the number somewhere, so for this developer, they analyze that as AAA being above 500 million, AA under 500 million, and under 50 million for indie. And for these, the median revenue for hobbyists was $1,300, and for indie, it was actually 20 grand. So what this means is that even though 5,000 games is still a huge amount, if you are a professional, if you are trying to do this as a living, if so, then you're probably not competing with all of these hobbyist games. If so, you're probably competing with the indie games, and those 20,000 obviously is much bigger than 1,000. But then of course, as usual, the results are very top heavy, so the top 10% of games make up 85% of the revenue. That's an insane amount, meaning that the remaining 15%, that one is split across the remaining 90% of games. So yeah, that's always the issue. You always got a bunch of games that make millions and millions of dollars, and then everybody else shares just a tiny pool of money. For this year, for 2024, Balatro was at the top with $28 million. Then Supermarket Simulator, this one was a huge hit, 27 million. Chained Together, this one is also a huge hit, definitely the perfect streamer game. This one made 22 million. And TCG Card Shop Simulator made 20 million. So yep, the Steam audience definitely does love these kinds of shop simulator type games, Management Tycoon and so on. Interestingly, there's a big gap in median revenue between self-published, just $3,000, and with publishers, $16,000. So yeah, that is an interesting one, because when it comes to publishers, there are some great stories of people that found quite a lot of success, the publisher really helped, but there are also some horror stories of publishers that really just take advantage of developers and don't really do anything for it. So yeah, looking at these numbers, perhaps nowadays there are more good publishers than bad, although naturally this amount of money, 16,000 versus 3,000, naturally this comes at a cost. If you sign with a publisher, naturally the publisher is going to get some sort of that revenue. So if you are considering signing with a publisher, definitely make sure you read that contract. Definitely make sure you're not being taken advantage of. Then in terms of genres, casual and simulation are up top, along with single player, which I guess makes sense for more indie games and AA games. At the bottom, you have puzzle platformer, match 3, and party games. So yeah, once again, that makes sense. There are hundreds of puzzle platformers, but not that many people that want to play them. So you've got obviously the hits like Hollow Knight and so on. Those make a ton of money, but those are very much the exception that proves the rule. All the other puzzle platformers, all the other tons of them, all of those make pretty much no money. So yeah, if you're trying to make a living from your games, if you're trying to do game development professionally, if so, then definitely do pay attention to what genre you go for. If you try to make a puzzle platformer, even if you make the absolute best puzzle platformer of all time, unless you make literally the best, you are probably not going to make it very well. Whereas if you make a simulation game, something like, once again, Supermarket Simulator, something like that, if you do that, chances are you're going to have a much easier time getting a decent amount of revenue. And in terms of highest median revenue per genre, so Not Safe for Work is at the very top. So if you're into those types of games, then they are apparently quite profitable. So it's definitely interesting to know how Steam has a massive audience, and actually a large part of that audience does want Not Safe for Work games. So if you do like making those, then that genre can also be a pretty hot genre. There's a Google Sheet with all that if you want to analyze it yourself, and there's another post with that on the top 50 games and also including AAA. So apparently Black Myth Wukong made almost $1 billion and Palworld made almost 500 million. So definitely insane results once you look at AAA games. So here the post has a bunch more stats. So on AAA, average revenue was $51 million, and for indie, average revenue was $9 million. Interestingly enough, for the average review score, AAA just has 79%, whereas indie has 83%. I think that makes sense. I mean, AAA games are usually very much about appealing to a broad audience, whereas indie games are more targeted to one specific thing and really making the perfect game for that. In terms of the average price, so AAA $52 and indie $21. When it comes to pricing, a lot of times indies tend to price their games way too low. Usually people try to go to like $5. That is usually a mistake. That usually makes it so you need to sell tens of thousands of copies in order to basically break even. So when it comes to pricing, the general rule is you should not go under $10. And then depending on the quality of your game, perhaps go with 15, perhaps with 20, and above 20, yeah, that really requires a very special game. And the entire Google Sheet contains a bunch more data. For example, here are some analysis on the games themselves. It's quite interesting how in AA games, 70 of them managed to reach over 1 million, and in indie games, out of 3.3 thousand, 174 reached over 1 million. That sounds pretty nice, that's cool. And then for hobbyists, obviously 0 of them reached 1 million. And for self-published games, 104 of those also hit 1 mil. So yep, definitely very interesting, but again, remember how that is all very top heavy. So for example, we can see here the average revenue. So for example, the average revenue for indie games, 278,000. That's a very nice amount, very nice. But then the median revenue, that is just 20,000. So yep, always keep that in mind whenever you look at these kinds of stats. Always pay more attention to the median as opposed to the average. Then on the chart for the games themselves, so Warhammer Space Marine 2 made 133 million. I think that's a pretty good hit, even though it's a AA game. I would guess it didn't cost that much to make, so yep, that sounds like a huge hit. Path of Exile 2, obviously, that's always a huge hit. Metal Lords, this is the one that I was slightly indie, slightly AA. So yeah, making 70 million, that's an insane amount, that's really cool. Then down here we see Hades. It apparently made 44 million. That's a really nice amount, that's nice to see. Then of course we have Balatro. Basically a solid developed game, so just single developer making 28 million, that's insane. Then if you had Supermarket Simulator, yep, the Steam audience really loves that one. Liar's Bar, this one was a huge hit with streamers and apparently made 17 million. Then here you've got, I'm guessing, some not safe for work game making 15 million. Wow, that's an insane amount. Then Content Warning made 11 million. I think this is the one that had basically a free release. So apparently, even though they had a free release, afterwards they still sold enough to make this much money. That's definitely very impressive. Crime Scene Cleaner, another one of these job simulator games, $10 million, that is really nice. Animal Well, so this is basically a platformer, but one that has a lot of hype behind it, and actually has a big publisher behind it. So if you do that, if you have such a special game, even if it is a platformer, you might find success, but still, I would definitely not recommend this. And Tiny Glade, wow, this one made $6 million. This one that basically went viral on Twitter. Basically on Twitter, the developer was constantly posting as they were researching the tech behind this, behind how to make these really interesting, really nice visuals. So yeah, I guess all that hype on Twitter did end up leading to sales. Kingdom Rush 5 apparently made 3.7 million. I really enjoyed the original Flash game, so I guess it's great how this many years later, this IP still has quite a lot of value, still worth quite a lot of money, still finds quite a lot of players. So yeah, lots of games, lots of data, and you can even see tag on the individual tags themselves. So up top, naturally, we've got the general ones, single player, action, multiplayer, sure. Then you can look for more specific ones, like for example, simulation. Then you've got sci-fi, you've got open world, first person with characters, you've got fantasy, horror, and so on. And of course, then we can sort by median revenue. And then just try to look at which ones have enough of accounts. For example, great soundtracks, so apparently soundtracks might help. Extraction shooter, 20 games of those made 200k on average. That's interesting, that's actually an interesting genre. Apparently there were 2 extraction shooters made by AA, 15 indies, and 3 hobbyists. So that's definitely an interesting genre. Then open world survival craft with 58 games, average of 114k. So yeah, definitely quite a lot of stats in all of this. If you want, go ahead and do some data analysis yourself over here. This can help you figure out which ones are the hot genres. So if you're trying to make games as a living, you should definitely pay attention to try to make a genre that has the potential to actually sell quite a bit. So once again, let me repeat myself, if you're trying to make games as a living, I would not recommend you do yet another puzzle platform. Then here for my thoughts at the end, I always find it interesting to look at these stats, and they continue confirming that the Steam audience really likes crafting, building simulation games. Personally, I really want to make a shop simulator game course at some point. That's a really hot genre, and I think I would enjoy making a game like that. And yep, that is definitely one of the many things on my to-do list. I would love to make some kind of shop simulator game. Something like Supermarket Tycoon or TCG Card Shop Simulator. I think these games are pretty fun, and clearly there is an audience for it. So if you want to make a game, and if you're choosing between puzzle platformer or simulation game, I would always recommend go for a simulation game. In reality, they're actually not too difficult. They're mostly really just about iterating with things. So you walk around, look at different objects, and interact with that specific object. So in terms of the programming logic, it's actually not that difficult. But of course, that's just talking as a general high-level overview, meaning it is not necessarily a very technically complex game genre, but of course, making it properly obviously requires quite a lot of skill. So yeah, it's always fun to look at these stats to see what is hot right now. I originally wrote about this in my Game Dev Report newsletter. This is where I cover any interesting game dev articles or news that I come across. I write a new newsletter every single week. So if you want to stay up to date, check the link in the description and sign up for free. Also, I'm hard at work on my CodeMonkey Toolkit asset. This is a collection of tools and elements to help you make better games faster. Basically, it's based on the tons of tutorials that I've made in this channel over the years. I'm taking those as a base and improving upon it, refactoring, polishing, and making a ton of additions. The goal is to make it all really easy to use. So for example, does your game need an input window? If so, just drag and drop. Do you need an easy way to reference assets? Use the GameAssets class, text writing effect, the error detector, use the web request class, the question dialog window, and tons more. I'm hoping this will be really useful. I'm still hard at work on it. I've made about 10 tools so far and I want to do a bunch more. If you're interested, then check the link in the description and sign up with your email and I'll let you know when it's out. Alright, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.